Very pleased to be joined here at Blogging the Boys by the one and only, the dashing, the debonair, cursed like me to root for Manchester United among his favorite football team, who mine has at least beaten in a playoff game, although that streak technically goes both ways if we go all the way back to the 2006 wild card round. The manager, editor-in-chief, and big baller boss over at Field Gulls, SB Nation, the Seattle Seahawks community. It is Mookie Alexander. Mookie, thank you so much for joining Blogging the Boys.
Yeah, great to be on here, RJ. And yes, it does cut both ways as far as playoff games. Just that one was a lot more memorable than the other, but one did involve the main character of today, Brian Schottenheimer, but it was for wrong reasons on the Seahawks side.
Yeah, I brought Mookie in for everybody, and we'll put the link to his X profile down in the description below. He's awesome. He's one of the best people to just follow for takes on life in general. He does root for Manchester United because he's dumb like me. And that being said, I've thought a lot about this offseason because you're here to talk about Brian Schottenheimer and his time as the Seahawks play caller, because as we've discussed at Blogging the Boys for this whole offseason, he has a unique history, what with being a play caller in the NFL, something you're obviously aware of. But on the Cowboys side of things, it is weird how incestuous they've become relative to head coaches. Mike McCarthy and the playoff losses to the Packers, and one of the real high points for the Cowboys in the playoffs in their entire drought era was the win in the wild card round in 2018 against Brian Schottenheimer's offense. So, yeah, good times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was probably the moment where the possibility and the speculation about trading Russell Wilson was real. And it was less about Wilson declining or anything, because Wilson had an outstanding season. And it was more of, all right, if they're going to run the ball this much, then you can get just about any cheaper quarterback to do the same thing, and maybe still have an above average ranking. But the thing that's irritated Seahawks fans with that game in particular was just how bizarrely run heavy they were against a pretty stout Cowboys front, which included Tank Lawrence. And the Seahawks offensive line was banged up and not very good all season, but it was made worse by the fact that they had injuries entering that game. But when they threw the ball and when they're proactive throwing the ball on early downs, they did pretty well. Like Wilson's numbers for that game were really good on a low volume. It's just that we wanted to see that volume increase. And what ends up happening is by the time the passing game gets going and they're into some sort of groove, too late, Cowboys have already won. So that was, a bad ending to what I think was a good first season for Schottenheimer. Those first few weeks were not good at all. In fact, really the story with Schottenheimer was after the 2017 season where Darrell Bevell got fired. It was kind of a point of emphasis for Pete Carroll, want to be a good running team again, because the Seahawks of 2017, they were legendarily bad in red zone rushing, and Russell Wilson led the team in rushing yards, and only one running back scored a rushing touchdown all season. And that was J.D. McKissick, kind of like Seattle's third string back. And Al Michaels erroneously called him Eddie Lacy on that touchdown. And I can tell you that even Eddie Lacy, when he was in shape, didn't run that fast. So that was kind of how bad things were going as far as the running game. So in 2018, there was an emphasis on, we're going to run the heck out of the ball. We're going to use play action. We're going to run, heavier personnel. So they used play action quite a bit. They had Chris Carson healthy, and he had his first 1,000-yard season. They drafted Rashad Penny in the first round, much to the consternation of many Seahawks fans. Like, why are we taking a running back in the first? How many more years are we going to put in so much draft capital on a running back? But those first couple of weeks with Schottenheimer, it was kind of rough because they weren't running the ball much, and Wilson was getting sacked at an exorbitant rate. So eventually the reins got pulled back. And I believe after week one, the first play that Schottenheimer called, every week after that was a running play. Like, it was that extreme. They were the most run-heavy team in the league from what I remember, or at least in a neutral game script situation. And don't get me wrong, it worked. Seattle was a top 10 scoring offense, and Wilson threw, something like 35 touchdowns and just 7 interceptions, while being near or at the bottom of the league in attempts. And Tyler Lockett, the connection between Wilson and Lockett, that was, I believe, close to, if not a perfect passer rating as far as their connection. So it was a low volume, but extremely high efficiency passing attack. So that was one good thing for Schottenheimer, albeit with the dreadful way the Cowboys game was called. And then in 2019, they started throwing it a little bit more, but we had kind of a similar way that the playoffs ended with, man, we wish Wilson had thrown the ball more. Enter the let Russ cook era of 2020. If you want to see like Schottenheimer's reputation kind of change a bit. Would he be adaptable, and would Pete be adaptable as far as running a pass-first offense? And sure enough, Schottenheimer was. And the Seahawks were one of the more pass-heavy teams in the league for the majority of the season. And even after they dialed it down the last few weeks, I still think they were fairly pass-heavy relative to the rest of the league. And again, Wilson was pretty efficient. There was like brief MVP talk that died out like halfway through the season, but still threw a career high in touchdown passes, threw for over 4,000 yards. They were the second highest scoring team in franchise history, that Seahawks team. And that's with the running game negatively impacted by injuries. Chris Carson had injuries that caused him to miss time. I think Carlos Hyde was hurt. There were injuries on the offensive line. So that was a really, really, really good offense. Now, how much of it can be attributed to the fact that it was the COVID season, empty stadiums abound, and just defenses took forever to catch up? That kind of remains to be seen. But, you know, Schottenheimer ended up getting fired after that year. And I would say that the downfall for the 2020 Seahawks was that once teams adjusted to the fact that Seattle was being this proactively pass first, I don't think Schottenheimer had a great counter. And especially when they started putting a second safety back there, like all these bombs away, deep passes to Metcalf, deep passes to Lockett, it was working like a charm. And then suddenly it wasn't. And when teams started to change things schematically, it felt like the Seahawks just didn't really have any great ideas toward the end of the year. And they ended the season not really that efficient on offense, other than playing with the New York Jets. And that Jets team was close to winless for that season. So Schottenheimer has at least shown his adaptability. He does run play action a lot. They were top 10 in play action rate all 3 seasons he was in Seattle. So I feel like because his Rams and Jets stints went so poorly, the whole reputation of Schottenheimer is that this dude is a terrible offensive coordinator. And then he kind of turned things around a bit in Seattle, maybe with the 2019 and 2020 seasons in particular. But we don't have a ton of data on him after that because he hasn't been play calling. I mean, I know he was with Dallas as an offensive coordinator, but if McCarthy's calling the plays, it's kind of hard to parse how much of this is just McCarthy and his mindset and his vision, and how much of this is Schottenheimer. Now, Schottenheimer's not a figurehead. Of course, he's got to have involvement in the offense. But that assumption I'm working on is that he's going to be calling the plays this season. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
So if he is, then this is going to be fascinating to see kind of what he's learned from 2020, you know, in 2025 compared to, I guess, the let Russ cook season, because, you know, Prescott and 2020 Russ aren't the same quarterback. It's different offensive philosophies, I would assume. I guess one of the things that you should expect is that there will be a push for Dallas to be a more effective running team.
And that's kind of what the general assumption has been. It's just been difficult, to your point, to kind of establish a paper trail because it's been so long since he's called plays. He didn't call plays for the Cowboys. I'd say the strongest abundance of data that we've worked with hasn't even been his Seahawks tenure, but his tenure with the New York Jets. And even, you know, they had LaDainian Tomlinson and Sean Green. And so it was, you know, these are different eras of football. Even I would offer 2020, 2019 Seattle is very different than just the NFL in general in 2025. Everything you said, and I appreciate the kind of overall 30,000 foot perspective on Brian Schottenheimer's time in Seattle, lines up chalk with what you have said in the past. I did not tell Mookie for the audience that I was going to be showing him some things that he has said before, but I do think that this exercise will be fun and interesting for you. So this is from the night of the playoff game, the wild card round in 2018. So this is January 6th. For those who weren't around, I believe this was pronounced Kian. Are you?
Sheen Fahi, I think.
Okay, then I could be wrong, but was at one point in time a staple of we'll call it NFL Twitter. I believe it's a complicated story that I don't know all the details on. But that being said, tweeted during the game, Mookie, Schottenheimer getting a lot of criticism for the way he's calling the offense. If he goes into a pass-heavy offense, DeMarcus Lawrence, ironically so, speaking of incestuous nature, and Randy Gregory would be walking off the field with a half of Wilson's jersey each. You screenshotted this. I don't know if this was you don't want to interact with Sion. I don't know what the story was here as far as your own personal internet usage, but you noted the Schottenheimer defender has logged on. This sounds like somebody who was fed up with Brian Schottenheimer, Mookie.
Yeah, I think the reason why I had to screenshot that is because I couldn't RT it. And hint, hint, okay. I might have said some things about Sheehan over the years. That let's put it this way: if the Seahawks offensive line could block as well as he does, Seattle would have more than one Super Bowl right now.
Nice.
So yeah, that game I think upset every Seahawks fan because it looked like Schottenheimer, who had called such a brilliant game against Kansas City, they were attacking Kansas City secondary so well, and Wilson had one of his best games of his career. They were throwing it quite a bit. They were running the ball effectively. It was a good mixture of pass and run, and that was like, oh man, that's a huge test that Schottenheimer passed, winning a shootout against his Kansas City juggernaut. Because I think that was
the first season of Mahomes, just for full context for everybody. His first MVP year, right?
Yeah, that was the 50 touchdown season, I think, for Mahomes. And Seattle kind of needed that win because if they didn't, then it would have to come down to last week to make the playoffs. And then that game was churned out, and it kind of just dredged up every negative thought I think I had and the fan base had about China, because he wasn't a sexy hire. Let's be real. The Jets stuff in particular just made it an underwhelming hire. Now, with time and just more knowledge and the ability to reflect, maybe some of Schottenheimer's bad rep is also a little bit unfair in the sense that the Jets had Mark Sanchez at quarterback, and Sanchez might have gotten to 2 AFC Championship games, but might have somehow got outplayed like Tom Brady in one of them. But when you don't have a good quarterback, there's only so much you can do. Now, there's certainly some bad moments in terms of like play design and other things that made Schottenheimer kind of reviled in New York. But in Seattle, he had a very good quarterback, and if not a great one, because I think those were Russell's peak years as a passer. And I want to emphasize, as a passer, he was not as a peak rusher. So Schottenheimer, I think what Pete Carroll brought him in for was to work on Wilson being a true effective pocket quarterback, which means we know that you're great at these escape acts, but it's not going to hold up forever. So I'd say Wilson's mechanics got a little bit better, in fact, significantly better in some ways, as to not bail when his first readers are open, not do the little spinorama stuff that could sometimes lead to great plays and other times lead to 20-yard sacks. So I think the quarterback development has been a plus for Schottenheimer. But the play calling, there were definitely a lot of weeks those first 2 seasons, and mostly the 2018 season, where it was just like square peg in a round hole, slamming your head up against the wall. I know that there was a game in Arizona where it was like 4th and 1, and they were close to field goal range, and they needed.
That was the Super Bowl, Mookie. That was the Super Bowl in Arizona.
This was one of the many other dreaded trips to Arizona.
Right.
But it was a 4th and 1 near halftime, and I think they had like all the routes were 8 to 10 yards down the field and long developing, and Wilson got sacked. And I might have said Schotty sucks, because it was just insane to have no quick developing route for a 1-yard play. But again, I'm glad that he's not stubborn. But a lot of time has passed since his last play calling job that I truly don't have a good read on how he's going to be able to transform this Dallas offense.
That's why I wanted to talk to you, because I'm going to show you something else. You said you're glad he's not stubborn. This is an article from Field Gulls, and it's dated June 5th of 2019. So this is the offseason following the playoff loss to Dallas, obviously, and you can see the byline there is yours. But this quote, which I believe came courtesy of the Seattle Times, is you properly credited. Mookie does his job right, everybody. Schottenheimer said, "We make no apologies for how we play. We want to run the football. We want to be physical. We want to take our shots." Shoddy shots has become kind of a trademarked thing. It's kind of low-hanging fruit, but whatever. Running the ball well, was the implication, is always going to be the objective for us. I think we're the best play-action pass team in the league. I really do. Talking about Russell's ability to throw the ball deep down the field was evident last year. Now, Russell Wilson's deep ball was a hallmark, obviously, of his kind of heyday of his career. Dak Prescott has a very underrated deep ball, which was exemplified in that 2020 game when Dallas went to Seattle and lost that shootout. But the confusion for me, and this is about the Cowboys, but I'm asking you to just shine a light and tell me where in the pond to look. You talked about Rashad Penny. You talked about Chris Carson. I mean, Rashad Penny was a first-round pick in 2018. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So Brian Schottenheimer is taken over, and he's got a first-round running back to work with. He does not have that with the Cowboys. Like, they are talking nothing about, in his history, his track record suggests nothing but a willingness and intent to run the ball. The Cowboys backfield at the moment, Mookie, in case you aren't caught up on their portion of our lads in terms of their depth chart, Miles Sanders, Javonte Williams. We've got Deuce Vaughn, obviously still hanging on. Everybody knows his story. Jaden Blue was the rookie draft pick this year out of Texas in the 5th round. Like, there isn't even a Chris Carson. I say that with all due respect to the Cowboys roster. And so I have a very difficult time kind of finding or trying to find the amalgamation of carries that he's going to distribute, because he doesn't have any proper lead tailback the way the Seahawks did at that point in time.
Yeah, Miles Sanders on purpose, huh? That's an odd acquisition. I mean I knew about the Sanders acquisition. I kind of forgot they drafted Jaden Blue, and I like Jaden Blue. He's probably not an every down back.
That's
So
exactly the point. And so like understanding that and parsing through that, part of me thinks that this is some sort of bluff. Like, do you recall when Mike McCarthy said at the Combine 2 years ago that they wanted to run the damn ball, and everybody freaked out and everybody, lost their minds, and then they didn't at all, and they threw it like crazy, and Dak finished second in MVP voting. So I'm trying to parse through, and that's where I'm curious if you agree, based on your experience and your knowledge of the NFL as a whole, if you think this is some sort of long con because they don't have the personnel who would suggest that they're going to be able to actually efficiently run, and they have so many young players along the offensive line, or if you're like, no, I really believe he's going to try to work that way, because I know you said he wasn't stubborn, but he was stubborn. He was defensive about the willingness to run the ball.
Mm-hmm. And with the benefit of hindsight, I do wonder how much of it, and this is kind of from Shion's tweet earlier, how much of having to run the ball was involving protecting Russell Wilson. Because the little detail I left out about that 2018 season with Russ is that he had tremendous touchdown to interception ratio. His efficiency metrics were great. His sack rate was like 11%. And Wilson's always had a high sack rate, but even by his standards, that was exceptionally high. But that's also the Seahawks offensive line there. But the thing with Russ, and now as we found out in these more recent seasons, a high volume passing attack is probably just not something that he can do consistently without bleeding sacks. Now, he's great at not throwing interceptions. That's always been the case. But sacks are essentially drive killers in disguise, because very rarely do you overcome a sack of, say, 7-8 yards and get out of that drive without having to punt the ball away or having to kick a field goal. So we have to kind of acknowledge that there's the Russell Wilson offense. And I think Schottenheimer did a good job of getting the most out of Russell Wilson as a passer. Now, as far as running the ball, 2018 season, very good, as I mentioned, with Chris Carson. Penny really just never got going. And he had a terrible, terrible knee injury in 2019. It was never really the same consistently after that. And then 2019, they did run it well with Carson, and then he got hurt. Penny got hurt. They were so hurt that that's why Marshawn Lynch had to come back for the last week of the season and into the playoffs, because literally the top three running backs all went down within 2 weeks of each other. But yeah, the running game wasn't elite, but it certainly was effective. 2020, I think they were okay, but nothing spectacular, and then he ends up getting canned. Now, in Dallas's case, I know they wasted just way too much time with the Zeke reunion. I'm not sure he had a single run longer than 15 yards. And then Rico Dowdle's gone, right? Where did he end up going?
Carolina.
Carolina, yeah.
Yeah. Although, who did the Panthers draft? I know they drafted somebody, but Jonathan Brooks, I believe. That whole backfield is questionable. I mean, that whole team.
And Brooks is pretty much out for all of this season too. So as far as running the ball, I think that there will be. I'm without looking at that FTN fantasy or wherever, that Dallas's rush DVOA couldn't have been good.
Oh no, it's horrible. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they were probably running the ball a little bit better toward the back end of the season, but by then the season was already lost. But you work with what you have, and I don't think that it would be wise for Schottenheimer to just be a run-first offense with questionable running backs. Like Javonte Williams has had an injury history. He has struggled to be an every down back, and he's had a couple of issues with fumbling, I'm pretty sure, when he was with Denver. And then Jaden Blue, as I said, probably not an every down back. I think he could be a pretty valuable receiving back, that's for sure. And then Miles Sanders is Miles Sanders. It worked in Philadelphia. It didn't really work in Carolina. And then and Deuce Vaughn, he's a great story. How can you not love watching that video?
Right.
But you are not going to have a 5'4" running back be getting the ball 20 times a game. So I'm thinking back by committee for Dallas. And that wasn't really what Schottenheimer did or really had in Seattle, unless it was injury forced. So I think that the best approach for Schottenheimer is to rely on Prescott and the top two receivers in CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens. And then and tight end, Jake Ferguson would still be the tight end one, right?
Yeah, And he hates the Seahawks, just so we're clear. Like, if I don't know
I'm well aware, and he certainly he ended up being indirectly a part of Seahawks headlines because that was the Jamal Adams yikes tweet happened right after the after Ferguson beat him for the winning touchdown a couple years back. But the idea of balance is not literal 50-50.
Right.
So
it's a great point.
And fans tend to just get that hung up. Like, we want to be a balanced offense. No, it doesn't mean 50% run, 50% pass, because that's wildly unreasonable. But on a week-to-week basis, you want to optimize your offense so that, all right, we can pass this much and be efficient. If we pass it too much, then we're starting to lose efficiency. Same thing with running the ball. We want to run it just at a rate where we're efficient and we're not wasting plays. So I think that's going to be the main goal for Schottenheimer, provided Dak's healthy and everybody's healthy, to get this Cowboys offense back into the top 10, which I think, especially with the acquisition of Pickens, as volatile as he could be, takes some of the pressure off of CeeDee Lamb, because there was just a significant gap for Dallas's receiving core below CeeDee Lamb that you could really depend on. So with Pickens, I know he's got his ups and downs as a receiver, but the upside would mean you have to defend two very good, two great receivers in the case of CeeDee Lamb, in addition to the fact that Prescott is still a top passer in this league. I'm not saying MVP caliber or anything, but he's certainly better than most quarterbacks in the league, however you rate Dak Prescott. And we know that's a discourse on ESPN every single minute.
It is, which, is highly annoying, which is why people like you are refreshing, because you're able to kind of, peel back the narrative layer and just assess the situation as is. I'm with you. I think we're all with you. It seems like a backfield by committee for Schottenheimer, but it is, it also seems like some foreign territory in terms of what we've seen from him in the past. I mean, obviously Russell Wilson was very talented, but was kind of, I think everyone was sort of learning that in real time as his departure with the Seahawks was kind of happening in parallel. And so Prescott's at a different stage of his career, certainly a different stage than Mark Sanchez was with the Jets, which makes the whole puzzle kind of difficult to put. I'm looking for that first bit of like the moon on the puzzle. It's like, oh, we can start building around this, part or whatever. My son is super into puzzles right now. That's why they're top of mind. But I wanted to get to two other previous tweets of yours. So just hope that they're not bad ones, I guess, is maybe my best advice.
All my tweets are bad ones.
I was curious because what I'm about to show you is a pretty popular trope, for lack of a better word, relative to coordinators, whatever side of the ball it's on. So I'm curious for your memories, just so we can kind of know what to potentially prepare for the discourse that surrounded Brian Schottenheimer entering the booth. So early in the 2020 season, there was this tweet from Joe Fan, who now works in real estate and obviously covers the Seahawks on some level. And you quote tweeted Joe, who noted that Brian Schottenheimer said he's able to see what the opposing defense is doing so much better from the booth. That 30,000 foot perspective we talked about, Mookie. And you said booth Brian Schottenheimer could be the greatest Seahawks mythical figure of all time. Are you not aware that the Twilight Saga takes place in the Seattle region? So you're putting him up against some serious competition.
Yes, I should. That is a good point. I hadn't even thought about that. But yes, now I'm remembering that the first couple of seasons, Schottenheimer was on the sidelines. And then in 2020, they moved him up to the booth to become Skybox Schotty. And those first few weeks of the 2020 season, the Seahawks offense was just firing. Well, the passing offense was firing on all cylinders. I mean,
Russ was cooking.
Russ was cooking. He threw for 4 touchdowns. I think he had like 5 incomplete passes against Atlanta week 1. And then week 2, he throws for 5 touchdowns against New England. And then you had the shootout against Dak and Dallas, and I think he threw for 4. I think he threw for 4 touchdowns, or either 4 or 5. It might have been 5 touchdowns. It was certainly 3 to Lockett, 1 to Metcalf, and 1 to Hollister. So, and then week 4, I think he threw another couple. He was among the league leaders in touchdown passes those first 5-6 weeks of the season. It felt like, he's seeing things differently. We're seeing not spamming runs to nowhere or anything of that sort. But we could tell that he was leaning into Russ's strengths more. And yes, they were airing it out at an exceptional rate as far as Wilson's air yards, throwing it to Metcalf. And why wouldn't you? He had Tyler Lockett before he kind of lost his step at the peak of his career, and DK Metcalf remains a lethal deep threat. So when you have those two, it's only wise and logical to attack defenses by beating them over the top. And that's what I think that Schottenheimer is going to bring to Dallas is forget all this cover two stuff and having two safeties deep. That doesn't mean that it is impossible to throw. One, they're not going to use two safeties deep 100% of the time. And two, it is not impossible to throw deep shots against two deep safeties. But when you have Pickens and you have Lamb, and then even somebody like Avonte Turpin, I mean, Turpin absolutely can be somebody who is beyond just a yards after catch threat. He can be somebody who can take the top off the defense. And then with Prescott's arm, definitely Schottenheimer is going to be looking for those shot plays. And a lot of that is going to come off of play action. And I think there's going to be a preference for under center play action. And this isn't really foreign to Cowboys fans either. I mean, there's almost certainly quite a bit of this during the Jason Garrett years and maybe some of the McCarthy years. And when Romo was still healthy in like 2014, you probably have your play actions to DeMarco Murray, throw it deep down the field to Des Bryant. So there's going to be kind of that element to it. It's just, can you get the play action game working? And no, you don't necessarily have to have, and you know this, you don't necessarily have to have a great rushing attack to be an effective play action team. What you can't be, and this is something that I'm pretty set on, you can't just not run the ball and do play action, because defenses are not going to respect a play action if they're not going to respect the idea that you're going to run the ball. So as long as you can run play action effectively and run the ball, not necessarily run the ball well, I think you're going to have some successful plays out of that.
Yeah, Chris Collinsworth was on NFL Total Access many moons ago, and obviously Mr. PFF, and I will always remember exactly how he said it. He said, play action is effective regardless of how you're running the football. And then he said, it took me a lifetime to where that became a fact in my brain. Now, the level of effectiveness or efficiency is different, right? Like if the modern day Eagles or Ravens run play action, we bite harder than if the Cowboys run it, but it is effective. It's all about, and I tweeted that clip out at that time, as Collinsworth noted, the defense's reaction by any kind of reaction generated by play action, it is in a literal definition sense effective, which is what we're talking about here. Okay, so Booth Schottenheimer was one thing. So he hasn't called plays from the sideline since 2019, which is the context that we were here to get from you, Mookie, obviously. So I'm going to show you one last tweet of yours. And if you need context, I'm here to give it to you. This was in 2023. So well after Schottenheimer had set sail. In fact, he was working for the Cowboys. This was his first season as the Cowboys offensive coordinator. You tweeted at 8:51 p.m. Central Standard Time, the proper time zone, on December 10th, that Brian Schottenheimer was owed an apology. You're cheating and looking it up, but
I'm trying to remember. Okay, just 2023. I know the context. I'm just trying to remember which game it is.
This was a Sunday night game. The Cowboys were kicking the Eagles' teeth in, like just obliterating. They won the game 33-10. And so it's important to note that this was Brian Schottenheimer's first season as the Cowboys offensive coordinator, but that it was also Mike McCarthy's first season calling the offensive plays after Kellen Moore's dismissal to at the time the Los Angeles Chargers.
Yeah, that might have been a just a little teasing post, because now I'm looking up December 10th. I wasn't thinking about the Cowboys because I didn't realize the timestamp. That was the game that Drew Lock started for Seattle. The first.
Okay, this is why I wanted to know. Okay, let's give us some context then. Okay,
yeah, so and the offense, it was kind of working, but also like the defense gave up 1 billion yards to San Francisco and they lost as usual. But yeah, that might have just been a little tease because of how well the Cowboys offense was performing and how much the Seahawks offense was kind of stuck in the mud throughout the season, whether Locke or Gino was starting. They had some bad lulls, and Waldron eventually got moved on as offensive coordinator, but that's mostly because pretty much everybody got let go along with Pete Carroll. So that was more like a tease than anything else. Just a playful jab because
you were instigating, Mookie.
Yes, okay. Classic textbook social media instigator right there.
Wow, clout chaser. Interesting.
Yeah, maybe we still owe him an apology because of how well the offense actually performed. Top 10 in DVOA consistently. As I said, second highest scoring season in franchise history, and the highest scoring, incidentally, was the year that they went to the Super Bowl back in 2005, and that was with one of the great offensive lines ever with Walter Jones, Steve Hutchinson, Robbie Tobeck, etc. Sean Alexander winning MVP. That was my first year living in Seattle too. So like those were great memories. But as far as Schottenheimer, one thing that I didn't bring up, the straight drop back passing game with Wilson, I don't recall being as effective as the play action. Now, just generally, play action is going to produce more effective passing statistics than straight drop back. But it certainly felt like when Wilson was at his best, if he could get in rhythm with quick throws, getting the ball out in time and not having to hold it forever, that was when the Seahawks offense was in a rhythm. And he definitely likes his shallow crossers and intermediate crossers with Lockett and Metcalf and other receivers, in addition to the deep shots. Screen passes, I think I don't know if you've tweeted it out or whatever. Screen passes for Seattle have been an adventure for seemingly forever. And I'm not expecting any improvement on that front. And he certainly didn't involve the running backs as pass catchers as far as being like split out wide a whole lot. Like if they're going to be out of the back, they're going to be check down options or they're going to be screen passes. So I think the big thing will be the receivers and the top tight end. We didn't really have a top tight end in Seattle in terms of like a dominant threat, except for the few weeks that Will Dissly was healthy in 2018 and 2019, in which case Dissly was really, really good. So Jake Ferguson can be that's kind of seam threat and option for Schottenheimer to work with. So there's talent there on the Cowboys offense. It's just, can Schottenheimer shed his? It's one thing for him to shed his pass reputation, but it's another thing to do this while also being in charge of everything.
Right.
And that's why it felt so surprising to actually see him get this job, because I don't think he has ever had an interview for a head coaching position in the NFL ever.
I mean, if he ever did, it would have been during those Jets heydays, obviously, just due to the team's success. I mean, the way we see that happen all the time. But I believe you're correct. And it took over a week into the process, this process, for him to get an interview with the Cowboys, which was, again, strange and unique, but we're not here to relitigate that situation. Those are your last two tweets. I have two quick ones before I get you out of here. Last one on Schottenheimer. You mentioned his reputation. A lot of his disposition, from my perspective, has not been one that emulates his father. But obviously his father is one of the most legendary coaches in NFL history. But if he emulates anyone, it's Pete Carroll. If he, obviously he holds and held his father's opinion in high esteem, but it seems that Pete was a highly influential person relative to his life and his career. I'm not necessarily saying schematically, but from the perspective of how he treats his players. We've seen him devote an enormous amount of attention to bonding with players. He's still, pretty youthful in disposition and attitude. Is that something that you saw and observed during his time in Seattle as well? Or was it just not necessarily possible because he was a coordinator, not the head coach?
Yeah, being a coordinator versus the head coach, I think, changes things. But, and now that I think about it, we kind of see with the disastrous year, not even a year, as a half year that Shane Waldron had in Chicago, and now stuff has been coming out that Waldron was just really not cut out for the job at all in Chicago. And there have been some rumblings that he was really not up to par in certain areas with the players in Seattle. I didn't recall that sort of thing happening with Schottenheimer. Now, Schottenheimer being in the league for so long and having prior experience, whereas Waldron had never been a regular play caller in the NFL when he got the job. Schottenheimer definitely had experience, not necessarily great experience, but it was still experience nevertheless, and hanging around respected coaches. And the one thing with Pete's assistants over the years, they generally command the respect of the locker room. So Dan Quinn over in Washington, and of course the former Cowboys defensive coordinator, loved Dan Quinn, and he was Seattle's defensive coordinator the year they won the Super Bowl, and he's seemingly beloved by the players, was beloved by the players in Atlanta, and it looks like they bought into him in Washington. You definitely have like Dave Canales in Carolina. I mean,
Chris Richard at the time in Dallas as well, like to your point.
Yes. Exactly. So, there's a type that Carroll, likes in his assistant coaches. Doesn't mean it's 100% hit rate, but it just means more often than not that Carroll's respected, but also so are his assistants. So how this will translate as far as being a head coach and having to deal with more than just your unit remains to be seen. But I think everybody's going to be learning about whether or not Schottenheimer can be a great leader, because it's his play calling is going to be the big scrutiny, as it is for every offensive coordinator in the league and for any head coach who also calls the plays. But if you're a bad leader in pretty much any job, you're going to lose respect pretty quickly, and you're going to end up out of there. I think about Brandon Staley over the Chargers. Not necessarily a bad defensive coordinator, although his defenses were bad there. But after his departure, it was made pretty clear that he was just not meant to be leading from a head coaching position. Some people are better off being coordinators than head coaches, and it's not because of knowledge of the game. It's more, how do you lead your players? How do you lead your staff? How do you work with people? It is still a people business, as much as the current society wants to eliminate that part as much as possible.
I think that's really well said. And hopefully, if I think there are examples we can point to for forever, someone maybe not necessarily providing the schematic advantage that, say, Ben Johnson does, but are able to. I'm also not implying that Pete Carroll didn't offer a schematic advantage, but do have the personality catalytic effect that a Pete Carroll can have that can overcome some sort of deficiency. Again, deficiency is a heavy word. But okay, this is my last one for you, Mookie, and I saved it for last because I'm kind of mad at you about this. So when the DeMarcus Lawrence thing happened, and you talked about him coyly at the beginning of our conversation here, this was your title. New Seahawks signing DeMarcus Lawrence disses Cowboys Super Bowl chances. Micah Parsons' response. This was DeMarcus Lawrence's first media appearance of any kind in Seattle after joining the Seahawks in free agency. Said the main difference, as you can see, is it's cold. Blah blah blah. Then he said, Dallas is my home. I made my home there. My family lives there. I'm forever going to be there, but I know for sure I'm not going to win a Super Bowl there. So before I give you the floor, Mookie, let me say that my perspective on this, and our audience has heard me say this, I love trash talk in the NFL. It's super fun. It's super cool. It is the low-hanging fruit in a poor way to be like, oh, the Cowboys can't win the Super Bowl. Like, I don't really respect your intellect if you're making this joke. Like, this is the easiest joke of all time to make. You get what I'm saying? And what's more is, as somebody who fights that fight every day, or fought that fight every day, I would expect DeMarcus Lawrence to be a little bit better than that. You know what I'm saying? But so to immediately about face, like in your first public appearance with someone else, it was just kind of silly to me. I hold no ill will. I wish him nothing but the best. If the Cowboys can't win the Super Bowl, I would love to see DeMarcus Lawrence lift the Lombardi Trophy. He's awesome, and I will forever hold him in high regard. But it did not seem well. If I was a Seahawks fan, I would like to think that I would have the opinion that I have as a Cowboys fan and be like, I don't know about this. This smells a little funky.
Yeah, with Lawrence and what he said, I assume that there must have been some bitterness over the fact that Dallas didn't re-sign him. I don't know if they ever gave him an offer or had interest in re-signing him. And maybe that was the part that stung, is the fact that he gave so much to the organization for so long and then you're gone. But Seahawks fans can relate to this. I mean, Richard Sherman got cut outright, and then he signed with the 49ers. And I know that Sherman had said some things about Seattle, wanting to he's looking forward to meeting them twice a year, this and that. So it happened there. It happened with some other Seahawks players over the years of high standard who ended up leaving or not getting re-signed. And it's like, there's that athlete's mentality, like, I got to get back at them for not keeping me around. So once cooler heads prevailed, I think DeMarcus knows that he's still a Cowboys, a Cowboys guy first and foremost because of how long he's been there, no matter how many remaining years he spends in Seattle or elsewhere beyond Seattle. So, hopefully Seattle's not playing Dallas this year unless it's in a playoff game. Otherwise, I would have loved to see what the reception would have been like had they even met in preseason or something like that.
Right. Well, it was a Cowboys preseason game in Seattle that changed the franchise. Now almost a decade ago. I just thought about this because I've never asked you this, and I have to now that we're recording and it's official. On the subject of like weird feelings about players doing weird things, what was your opinion on Earl Thomas chasing down Jason Garrett and telling him to go get him? Because that had to be weird. That had to feel strange. Like, dude, we're literally going to the playoffs. Like, we are. Like, what do you like? I just imagine that had to be it was exciting for the Cowboys because their season was over on that Christmas Eve. But what were your emotions?
Was it the Christmas Eve or was it? No, it couldn't have been Christmas Eve.
It was.
I think it was. Was it that one or the early 2018 where they beat Dallas at home and Earl got 2 picks in that game? It was one of those two.
No, so he chased down Jason Garrett on Christmas Eve in 2017 at AT&T Stadium, and he said, "Come get me." in the offseason, and that didn't materialize. And then the game you're talking about, when Seattle embarrassed them, he took a bow to the Cowboys sideline after one of the interceptions. And that was controversial, but that was, at that point, that was like part of the saga. The saga was born on Christmas Eve 2017. It's my point.
Yeah. So of course his contract was coming up pretty soon, and Seattle wasn't interested in extending, and obviously they were justified. But it's just
Sure.
that there was a bitterness to it. So you mentioned the Christmas Eve game, and now I'm remembering that was one of the worst games I've seen Seattle manage to win. They had more penalty yards than offensive yards in that game. But the 2018 one, where we were getting our wires crossed, I forgot about the bow.
Yeah.
I think that was natural, that because Earl played his college football at Texas and grew up there and all that. I think he even has a home in Texas. That's, hey, Dallas could be my next spot if Seattle doesn't want me. And then 2018 happens, he takes a bow, and that was week 2 or week 3. So the very next week is
the
when
Cardinals. The Cardinals game in the middle finger. Yeah.
Got carted off, middle finger, and he never plays for the Seahawks again. And I know he must have been deeply upset, because he thought, when you suffer an injury like that, you're thinking, I'm about to be a free agent. I didn't get my money, and I'm about to be worth so much less on them in the open market. Now, he's still got a pretty hefty contract from Baltimore anyway, and he only saw a year of it. But Earl's an interesting character in almost a tragic way, just with some of the things that have been going on the last few years. I know that Pete Carroll on the Get Got podcast a couple of weeks back, he always talks about reaching out to his former players and keeping that connection. And I can sense that Pete is almost like a fatherly, if not grandfatherly figure, or crazy uncle at times. But he said that with Earl, I still love Earl, but Earl don't love me, though. And he said it with a laugh. So I don't want to make it sound like he made it seem grim, but I'm sure that there might still be a little bit of bitterness over the way that Seahawks tenure ended, with him just playing on his expiring contract, and Seattle was not obligated to give him a new deal. That's just the nature of the business. But in terms of Earl's perspective, that's a lot of money down the drain initially, or at least that's what he was initially thinking when he broke his leg for a second time in 3 seasons. So, yeah, I miss watching Earl on the field. But yeah, those were definitely some wild moments. And I swear that there are so many former Seahawks that are linked to Dallas over the years. Bobby Wagner, of course, being one of them. And then they ended up never going there. But we've got our former assistants going there. So
I'm telling you, I said it. There's a weird incestuous nature. For a while, the Cowboys were really modeled after Seattle. Obviously, Chris Richard before Dan Quinn. They never really brought in, to your point, like Bobby Wagner or any former Seahawks under Quinn. They brought in they brought in DeMonte Kazee, Keanu Neal, the players from his tenure in Atlanta. But it was. I mean, and Dallas had that amazing win there in 2014. And they had the playoff game again. It's just been the Earl Thomas moment. Obviously, the Romo bobble was way before that. But there's just these weird seminal, the Dak era beginning in general. These weird moments that were seminally tied between Dallas and Seattle. And so I've always found that interesting. Mookie, this is dropping on the 4th of July. But you are going to be running around, no pun intended. So plug whatever it is you want over the course of the weekend at Field Gulls and otherwise, so that everybody can check your stuff out, please.
Yeah, when July 4th rolls around, I will be at press conference probably, or is this going out in the morning or the evening?
7 a.m. Central Standard Time on the 4th of July.
I will be fast asleep on 4th of July. But when I do wake up, I'll be doing a run around the press conference, the second of 2 press conferences, in fact. If you're a track and field fan, or if you love watching the track and field at the Paris Olympics last year, many of those Olympians and world record holders and Olympians from Tokyo and world championship years from other competitions, they're going to be in Eugene, Oregon, where I will be at the time of this video going live for the Prefontaine Classic. It is, to me, and I think inarguably, the biggest global track meet in the United States, and one of the biggest global annual track and field meets just anywhere. So I will be covering that for SB Nation. And for those of you who know your pro wrestling or UFC, Brock Lesnar's daughter, Maya Lesnar, is going to be making her professional debut as a shot putter. She was the NCAA champion for Colorado State just a few weeks back, also in Eugene, in the shot put. So it's kind of a weird experience for me, because I covered Brock's final fight when I used to cover the UFC, and that was like 9 years ago when he had his last fight. And now I'm going to be watching in person Maya Lesnar's shot put debut. So there are going to be a lot of familiar names there, not Noah Lyles and not Tyreek Hill either. But Sha'Carri Richardson will be there in the 100 meters, and Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone in the 400-meter hurdle. So it's going to be a terrific meet. All around should be a great crowd. And maybe you'll catch me on TV depending on where I'm seated, because I'm either going to be in the tribune in the stadium, or I'm going to be in a tent, not particularly close to the stadium, covering it with other media people. So be on the lookout for that. The Prefontaine Classic, it's on NBC and Peacock from 1 p.m. Pacific to 3 p.m. Pacific. So that's 3 Central Time to 5 Central Time.
That's excellent. Like I said, we'll link Mookie's Twitter X handle down in the description below. Check out SBNation.com for all of his coverage. The ironic part about what you said is you covered Brock's final match, I presume, for the Bloody Elbow here at SB Nation.
Yeah, for Bloody Elbow at SB Nation. That was UFC 200.
Yeah.
And time flies that we're now up to 318. So I've long since stopped covering MMA, but of course I know Brock was still popular in WWE, and he's not in WWE right now. And there are many other reasons for Brock to be in the headlines right now that are not necessarily good. But Maya is a really, really good shot putting prospect. And with the World Championships in September, she could try and make her first Team USA World Championship squad at the end of this month. I won't be covering that because I will be at Seahawks training camp instead. So this is going to be the summer of traveling for me.
Well, I mean, make sure you download videos for your iPad and you're prepared. You know what I mean? You've got podcast stuff to listen to. Anything else you want to say before we get out of here, Mookie? The floor is yours. Speak now, forever hold your peace.
Yes, hopefully Brian Schottenheimer works out for Dallas, and if he doesn't, then it just means more content for everybody else out there on social media. Look, he's not going to be somebody who is having Pete Carroll kind of like as the overhanging boss. He gets to be the boss this time, so this is going to be an interesting ride. And then as far as 4th of July, please be safe. Please don't do anything stupid with fireworks. And please keep your pets inside as much as possible, because I never like seeing that. I don't want to see dogs and cats and others scared because of the fireworks. So please take care of yourselves and cook up some good food. Don't embarrass yourself by posting barely seasoned stuff on social media.
All of that is fantastic advice. I've got 2 dogs, and I'm going to do my best to keep them chill. You know, it's a tough thing, but there's some peace in knowing they're indoors, they're safe, and you just got to kind of ride it out and do what you can to comfort them. Mookie Alexander, ladies and gentlemen, set to take over Pedro Pascal as Mr. Fantastic in the sequel, set to come in 2 years' time. Mookie, thanks so much for your time, and we'll see you next time.
All right, take care. Thank you.